Welcome back to Hour 3 of the NutriMedical Report, one of the most popular hours of the week, with our guests who also have their own show, John Moore and Ann Morrison, 6 to 7 a.m. Central Standard Time, Monday to Friday on Republic Radio. John's site, of course, is thelibertyman.com and Ann's homeland-defense4you.com. John, you've been a forensic investigator for years. You're former Special Forces. You're a prepper consultant. So when I tell people they want to have a consultant how to prep them, whether they're getting a container for the Cook Islands or they're just trying to get themselves ready, we've collaborated on trying to do a list called the 10-plus list, which is over in our preparedness. We're always kind of revising and updating it. You have contacts inside and outside the government. What's the latest buzz happening, and what kind of warnings are they giving us?
Well, thank you, sir. As always, good to be here. Well, the latest buzz is still a great focus on three matters. EMP just keeps coming up over and over again, the likelihood of either a regional or nationwide EMP attack. Next would be the flu pandemic, and there's no way to look at this other than it being biological weapons. And last but not least, cyber attack. And, of course, cyber attack and EMP go hand in glove together. One would certainly lead to the other. The month of November keeps popping up both from my private sources and little tidbits we get here and there, such as the conversation between the three Russian males in the bar last week, where they were laughing and joking and making fun of the stupid, dumb Americans, being overheard by a stupid, dumb American who could speak Russian, by the way, and and then saying toward the end of their conversation that all the stupid, dumb Americans would find out just how stupid they were on November the 7th. Without saying what would happen, if anything, on November 7th. So that's what we're hearing, and the reports continue to be multiple from sources that don't know each other from different parts of the country, which gives everything an incredible amount of credibility.
Now, there's a couple of things that are happening behind the scenes. People sometimes have the delusion that they've solved the financial problem with the so-called closure of the 16-day shutdown and the other issues. The sequester hasn't been dealt with. The real debt issue, in fact, the debt I saw jumped something like $338 billion in one day. The dollar is slipping. This is today's report from World Stock Markets from the Wall Street Journal. The dollar is slipping as compared as the Fed worries continue. This problem is not solved. In fact, if anything, people can presume the Democrats are delusional enough to presume that, quote, they've won. They've won nothing. Neither of the Republicans won anything. In fact, the policy they had to shut down the government is like deciding not to pay your bills by not going to work. The fact is that we have the sequester coming. The real issue is both parties are basically fascist, and they want to do a sturdy fascism. I use the analogy of two wolves deciding with a pen of sheep which recipe cards they're going to use, and they try to calm the sheep down by telling them, don't worry, we're going to figure out which recipe is best for dinner. And
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that people don't understand that this is a dance. This is a game. It's, as Jack Nicholson would say in The Shining, this is a dance with the devil in the moonlight. John, when we see this, we know that the Treasury, they've been able to, quote, say that they've extended the charter, but actually the Fed Reserve is coming to an end, and it's coming to an end because they want to mutate into a new global world biometric world currency system that will trap China and Russia. Any comments in this area?
Well, I would think, Dr. Bill, with the complexity of getting legislation passed through Congress, that if they were going to introduce legislation to renew the Federal Reserve and give it a new charter for another 100 years, that legislation would be drafted, would be introduced, it would have sponsors, because we're looking at, less than 3 months before the charter expires.
Yeah, and apparently they said this happened many years ago, but I find no evidence that they even have the legal right to extend a charter. A charter cannot be extended without a full congressional vote. You can't just sneak it in, and you can't attach it as an attachment bill. So what we have is a charter to a foreign corporation, which in its very nature is illegal. You can't have in other words, Congress can't pass over its responsibility or rights to a foreign corporation, the Fed Reserve, like they did 100 years ago, which means this game is over. They know that that's why they're trying to take us to war with Syria. Now they're saying that any moment Israel could go and attack Iran. That's only because Obama gave tanker bombers and all kinds of other equipment basically gratis, billions of dollars, so the crazy Israelis could do a preemptive strike on Iran and start World War III. Their main engine for global control, when they can't get cooperation from the political parties, is to take us to war. And in wartime, virtually anything goes, including totalitarianism. So Obama is just itching to do something catastrophic, whether it's the Hajj virus coming back, because the Hajj was over yesterday, whether it's H7N9, where there's a power blackout with the cover of ICE on, saying it's going to occur right at the time when it crosses the orbit of Mercury and causes a coronal mass ejection. When you hear these kind of comments, as Professor McKinney says, this has all the smell of a false flag coming, like 9/11.
Absolutely. Well, you're right, Dr. Bill. I recall, of course, I wasn't alive, and neither was you, the temporary emergency measure of taking money from people's paychecks, we now call it withholding, during World War II. Well, obviously, the temporary emergency of World War II is over, but taking the money from our paychecks every week has continued and will continue ad infinitum. So, you're right.
John, I don't know if you heard this, but we talked about this. I want to get your opinion on it. We talked about this, John and Ann, with Harley Schlanger, that in Europe they're discussing the idea of Cypriot policy, of bailing, of taking 17 to 30% of everybody's assets, including the equity in their home, their pension funds, their bank accounts, even their gold and silver coins or private property, and bailing it into the banks. This is and it's not just a one-time deal. Let's say it's one time, but it's like a vampire that says, I will not return. This is the only time I will take your blood. Well, that's not going to happen. The next week, or the next full moon, the vampire is going to come back wanting more blood. So
that's right.
This idea that somehow, just like the bail-ins and the bailouts of the too big to jail banks, I don't buy it. And the fact that they pushed it past Christmas just means they don't have all of their ducks lined up to do what they want to do to us. And they do want to do things like chaos of a CME. They do want to see an airborne plague, because I've been saying this at the top of the list, an airborne plague like the Hajj coronavirus or H7N9 is the ideal, because you'll get cooperation from the public. You can't have martial law unless the public feels in danger.
That's right.
And out of fear passes their authority to a bunch of maniacs.
That's right, and I've been saying that for years, Dr. Bill, that whatever the precipitating event for martial law is, it'll have to be both real enough and scary enough that people will go along with it. Otherwise, it will fail. Otherwise,
and of course, the reason, if they were just to declare martial law tomorrow and start shooting at people, those officers, whether they speak with a Russian accent and they've been embedded as sleeper agents in America, or their DHS, whatever, with their hollow point bullets, they won't have many heartbeats left on this earth before they're going to meet Jesus. It doesn't matter, as I say, the joke is, what do you say, 300,000 Chinese troops with 1,700 armored personnel carriers and tanks coming across the border through San Diego or through Texas into America? I call them takeout. They're targets, okay? The fact is, we as Americans will take them out very quickly. And the problem is, this government are terrified of an armed public, and they've done everything they can in the first and second term of Obama to disarm the public, and all they've done is actually increase gun sales and bullet manufacturing. The public are totally aware now, this is not a theory, this is not a drill. These maniacs are absolutely going to do something bad, because when they go for your guns, they're going for you next.
Absolutely. Well, Doctor, I'm the commander of my local American Legion post, and we have men who are Korean War veterans out there chucking hay bales and driving tractors and trucks every day of the week. Healthy, vigorous men, well into their 80s. By means of saying most veterans, regardless of their age, still pose a clear and present danger to any threat to this country.
Exactly. Plus, they can also train the young man in a matter of 2 weeks. Those young guys will be snapping to attention and learning all the main core activities they need to do very quickly when it's life and death. And we're still trying to get hold of Professor McCanney, but you can go to jmccsci.com, and you've got an important report on Fukushima. I did an update last night, too, on Ren's Network on Hour 2. I'm on there every Thursday, the second Thursday of the month. I'm on Hour 3, not 2. And what's your update on Fukushima? Because this is a growing catastrophe, isn't it?
This is a growing catastrophe. We have a biologist who's actually gone out and looked at the anecdotal reports about salmon, and they have different types of salmon. We probably know Chinook and Coho, but the easy classification is pink and red. And what they're finding is that they're turning yellow. They're no longer pink or red. The flesh is yellow. The eyes are yellow. The eyes are popping out, and they're not breeding. And and they're not just little yellow. They're deep canary yellow. Parts of their hearts are yellow. Their gill arches and spines are yellow. The cartilage in their head is yellow. The spleens are swollen and enlarged, and their livers are spotted. And in some cases, their eyes were bugged out. And the First Nation, now that's what the Indians like to call themselves, they have fishing rights for salmon on the Columbia River. And those are granted to them through because they're a nation within a nation, that is an agreement between them and the United States government. Well, they probably have a right to sue the United States government for not making the salmon pink. I don't know. This is really scary, and to have a biologist go out and in fact, her pictures are up on YouTube.
Well, we're now seeing the radiation level had dropped for a couple of weeks, but it's now surged back up to 4 times background from 2 times background. That just happened today.
I'm not saying that this is due to radiation, but
it could be due to pathogens, but the radiation is going to weaken them so they'll get sick. Just like the radiation right now, everyone in the northern hemisphere is suffering from low-grade radiation poisoning. It's already been estimated between 22 and 100,000 Americans have already died since the inception 2.5 years ago of Fukushima. We know that the mortality rate now in intensive care nurseries within 6 to 7 weeks in Pennsylvania went up 42%. And the only variable was Fukushima. So the unborn and the elderly, the weak, the in utero, they are incredibly, billions of times more dangerously affected by radiation. Professor McCanney, tell us an update on what's going on with ISON, with, of course, the moves by the government to create a false flag climate. I see these, as I say, the smell of 9/11 is all over this, isn't it?
Yeah, I smelled this a long time ago. I didn't quite know how they were going to put it together, but it's very clear now. But in that time frame, the key was when I discovered that NERC false flag, what they call an exercise. North American
the rule of the corollaries of a false flag is it's always, number one rule is it always happens during a drill. Number two, we're here to help you, which is to help you into your mass grave. And number three, it's never done by terrorists, it's always done by the government.
Yeah, and so this NERC organization, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, look that up and look at what it is. Very, very vague, very strange where this company came from, very strange where they get their money from, and very strange that they would be able to set up an international power outage drill and then have all of these people contributing to it, including government agencies like the FBI and Homeland Security, etc. Very, very, very strange. And when you read their statement, their mission statement, once again, extremely vague. When you read what they're supposed to do in this so-called power outage exercise, extremely vague. They don't. Yeah,
they're not saying we're going to do this and that. We're going to, quote, shut off. Here's a menu, and I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm going to say menu. Number one, we're going to shut off portions of the grid and see if the grid can, quote, heal itself. power distribution. Number two, we're going to do station blackouts of nuclear reactors and see if the people on site will be able to turn on the power and prevent the reactor from going critical and losing control of the containment. And number three, we're going to do a trial where we're going to have cyber terrorism attack the power grid and shut down portions of it or nuclear reactor feeder trunk lines and see if the workers or the semi-automated system can respond so that it doesn't cause major loss of equipment or material or cause a nuclear critical explosion. This is the stupidest thing I ever heard. We have an ancient system that's not properly put together. We don't have the staff that can handle these kind of contingencies. This is how Chernobyl happened. You're a scientist. Why would they do this right at a time when there's a likelihood of a CME, which they know may not be Earth-directed? As I said before, it's like trying to hit an egg at 100 yards with a shotgun. You're not likely to hit the egg. So why would they say 100% probability of, quote, a CME hitting the Earth causing major damage? Or, and this is a crazy cyber terrorism when we're not at war with Iran or anybody else. Why would we have cyber terrorism?
Yeah,
I mean, any country that would do it, we would immediately identify it and we nuke the hell out of them. It's an act of war. If Iran did it, we'd have bombs dropping on Tehran in 30 minutes. So the idea that any nation is stupid enough to do cyber terrorism in America, like Tianjin, China Blue Army, and they're going to get away with it without being annihilated, that's craziest thoughts I ever heard.
Well, the question is, when they talked about cyber terrorism, they didn't say what it was going to be directed at. What I read was that, the one was coinciding with the power outage, but it could be, and what I'm expecting, is a banking, directed at banking.
Exactly, yeah. Well, they've already had those things. In fact, Adobe just put a notice yesterday. There have been other, quote, probing things. We know that the power grid has been reached into, but you're right. All you have to do is get into e-commerce, and that's enough to actually shut down a civilization, is mess with email lists or electronic funds transfer or the use of credit cards. That could really be pretty bad.
Yeah, well, there's I found an interesting thing here recently, is that when the government was shut down, some very strange things happened. For example, some IRS programs kicked in that started levying people's bank's account and wiped them all down to zero across the country. And when the people, accountants or whoever, I got this from people who are accountants, and that had this happen to many of their clients, when they called the government, there was nobody there to answer because the government was shut down. And so anyway, people don't understand how tenuous their cyber life is. And now with e-billing, e-commerce, e-banking, everything is in e-form. Most people don't have a shred of statement verifying what their balances are, what their payment activity has been, their house payments,
and of course, and basically cyber identity theft is all over the place. What the government wants is even more of this that makes us more vulnerable and more accountable to an electronic bank's total control. They want to have biometrics, so you have to lean forward and put your eyeball on an iris scanner or your 10 digital fingerprints and take a biometric picture of your face to turn on your computer. That's what their plan is. Welcome back, and Ann, I'd like you to give your comment on what you think is going to happen with beta coronavirus now the Hajj is over yesterday. When you combine this with Professor McKenney's, like a bloodhound scientist, he's tracked this down. John Moore, we're all in agreement that we feel, I call my spidey sense is telling me that when they think this is all over with the financial issues, even Russia and China and everybody, we're still on the precipice of an attack on Iran by the crazy nation of Israel. We're still Obama now thinks he's winning, so he's now on a big push for amnesty. Rather than just kind of streamlining the regular process for people becoming Americans and hiring more staff, he wants to have people jump the line and not even become integrated Americans that learn the Constitution or speaking English. This is craziness, but yet this dictator, as a proxy for the bankers, is in a desperate grab to become the next American emperor, the first American emperor, because they want to make the Congress and the Senate vestigial. So your comments, John, and just jump in and what you'd like to say about this, because I think that, especially when we're pushing this back to January, this is not a cure at all. This is like taking somebody off a ventilator for 20 minutes to see if they're going to be able to breathe on their own, and you realize they're turning blue, you need to put oxygen back on and put them on the ventilator. This is not going to work, is it?
Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, okay. Well, they had said that there hadn't been any more cases of the MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, since September 26th. However, this week they reported 2 more fatal cases, and these were primary cases. Now, you understand that primary cases are almost 100% fatal. So
yeah, and by the way, these cases showed up in Qatar where there was no evidence that the person that got it traveled.
And if it's not a primary case, then altogether, if you average out the mortality rate, it's about 50%. Now, what they think is that bat hosts, that the current MERS coronavirus, co-evolved with bat hosts for an extended time period. And so there's 2 or 3 variations of this MERS, of this Middle East Respiratory syndrome. They still don't know what the host is, and they still don't know how it's transferred into the human body, and they still don't know what the incubation period is. But the calculation that is based upon the cluster size indicates that the base reproduction rate has now reached 1. And at 1.2, they would call it an epidemic. And at that point, there would be the cluster size then would go to infinity. In other words, it would be an epidemic.
Right. Well, if you look at the actual hotspots on the international map, which Henry Nyman has a link from Lacrombonomics, the MERS coronavirus cases and sequences, you can see hotspots now in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in France, in northern Italy. You see it in Tunisia now. You see it in Morocco. You see them showing up in Israel, in Jerusalem.
Those are clusters. The only new cases that are happening in Saudi Arabia.
Right, but no, the new one that Henry Nyman reported last night was in Qatar.
Well, I don't know where that information came from. My information comes from epidemiologists.
Yeah, actually, the one that I have it actually opened here so I can tell you. This one was reported, Qatar MERS, it was Recombinomics comment 9/15, October 17th. The Supreme Council of Health said that the new patient of age 61 years old and suffering from chronic diseases did not travel outside the country in 2 weeks prior to his injury, as he did not, it was not in touch with, I can't pronounce it, Bazaman. The council was announced on the 7th of September. So the translation described in the new MERS CoV confirmed case 61M in Qatar. The case follows a cluster confirmed last week, which linked to travel to Medina by the case. In other words, we're going to have an explosion starting today, because this is the day after the Hajj. That's 2 million plus people are going to travel from Saudi Arabia carrying this virus. It's my estimation from the reports I've read that the incubation is probably a week to 10 days or longer. It's a long incubation. If it's in your upper respiratory tract, it usually is like a flu. If it goes to your lower respiratory tract, your chances of survival are about 10%. It kills you or puts you on dialysis, and you may end up in a heart-lung bypass or ECMO machine. If you do survive, you will have a very high likelihood of being ventilator dependent, in congestive heart failure, and require intubation and dialysis for the rest of your very short days.
Yeah, well, they're linking it to the DPP4 cell surface receptor. And so if they'd use the DPP4 surface cell receptor in treating type 2 diabetes. So there are medicines. There's about half dozen medicines that people can take here in the United States. I don't know if they're being treated with that over in other countries.
Well, the thing is, you can block the receptor, by the way, with 2 things that we know right off the top. Firstly, actually 3. The first is the anhydrous catechin and NutriDefense. That's the most powerful. Second is MyCell D3, 50,000 units to 100,000 units a day for the acute exposure. And the third is high-dose Power C mixed mineral ascorbate, 60 to 100 grams a day equivalent. And those 3 things will block the receptor. They'll block the receptors instantly, and We have silver 100, the only ionic silver in a complex. We have the Tesla-activated nutriodine. We have Allison Med, my latest advanced Allison, which I designed from a source in Germany. And we have immunoglobulins, too, that help fight the infection. So there's no excuse for anybody to, quote, take a vaccine that they say will work, which it won't, because the virus is going to continue to modify, even if it was possible to make one. And number two, the virus has got a long incubation period, so most people get mild infections. And the serious ones, you can't predict that they have pre-existing conditions, because just like H1N1 in 2009, there's a high likelihood we're going to get a lot of people with no pre-existing conditions that are going to die from this.
Well, that's right. We have not been exposed to this coronavirus before, and so we have no immunity to it. Dr. Bill, on your website, have you put those names down as a possible MERS treatment?
It's on the. It's basically the first line defense kit. Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. So, John, when you look at all these things, I see an extremely high likelihood between now and the spring of an airborne plague. And even if the virus doesn't kind of explode right away, we now know from the genetics that multiple viruses with different genes for the coronavirus are present in the same host. It's going to embed and get increasingly able to replicate and to travel between people. And we have the H7N9. All it needs to do is jump across the Pacific, and boom, we have a pandemic.
Well,
I think we are sitting on the. Yeah, we also have the reports that this flu also, by the way, by the public health reports from the CDC, etc., this is the worst flu season just for H3N2V in 10 years.
Right. Okay. Well, I did want to talk about the H7N9. We have an alarming report out of ProMed, and they thought that they had stopped people catching H7N9 because they had closed the live poultry markets. However, we now have a person, a 35-year-old man, a young man, who has tested positive for H7N9, and he is in critical condition. And this is a very alarming report because this new case might be the harbinger of a new outbreak.
Exactly. All you need is one individual like this, because if he spreads it, say, to 4 or 6 people, before you know it, you now have a virus that can attach the receptor binding domain very quickly. You know that the government needs plausible deniability to declare martial law. A run at the banks, a barn market blowout. I don't think that when I see these reports in the history of what Japan and China are saying right now with Abe and the Chinese government, it appears to me that they don't think that by any means this is over.
No, and not only that, now they have tied this virus, this coronavirus, to a H7N15, and they said they've never seen that, and they've never seen the H7N7 before, and they're tying it to that.
Well, a source from a Chinese virologist, one from Colorado, and one inside DHS, all three said this is a bioweapon, H7N9. Welcome back. Professor McKenney, on the break you mentioned a couple of very important points. Can you repeat those and dialogue with John and Ann? Because I think it's important what you just said. People need to start putting the science together with the geopolitics and the apocalyptic issues that are going on. The globalists, basically, their view is that they can only stay rich if they kill most of us off, that the world is not sustainable. But that's why I see the book Earth in Balance by Igor, I call him Al Gore, the almost president. His whole idea from the World Watch Institute, Agenda 21, the Georgia Guidestones, is that they need to kill 85 to 90% of the population to save the super wealthy, to get advanced life extension technology, to maintain the planet so it's still livable, and to kill off most of us because we're considered now a pathogen on the planet. And this is basically a wrong-headed theory based on incorrect idea of energy, the lack of pollution that could sustain a planet, and where the fact is we can become stewards, like the Nawapa Project. Tell us your analysis, because this is very important to people grasp. They're attacking you directly as the main attacker, not just over trying to get martial law, but because you talk about literally limitless energy outside the Earth.
Well, I talk about limitless energy because I've defined where it comes from. It comes from the electrical energy that comes off the sun, something that NASA emphatically denies in their Tier 2 science. But with that energy, third world countries can clean water, they can grow food, and grow the basis for a sustainable society. With that, they would start to reduce their populations naturally, hold them at bay, and bring up the quality of life. And you know, let's face it, you don't need a job pushing paper and sitting at a typewriter all day to have a good lifestyle. And that's a myth that has been propagated in the Western Hemisphere. You need food, you need water, a roof over your head, and then the thing that's been lost in Western society is just sitting down and communicating, visiting with your family. Totally lost. You know,
exactly. In other words, if you look at more primitive cultures, they didn't work our hours and they had a decent life. They were able to have family and community life. They were able to grow food, live in a non-polluted environment. They didn't have to travel for hours to their place of work. Didn't have to breathe in pollutants or drink it. You know, if you actually look at the standard of life of most people in the world, it's not very good. I saw a report that they say there's 30 million slaves. I beg to differ. In China alone, there's 250 million slaves that live in slave camps that are migratory all across China, just in one country. That doesn't include all the other countries like India, which has, they say, at least 14 million slaves. And Mauritania has the highest percentage, which is 5% of their population. The fact is it's much, much higher than that.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you call a slave. I would call the majority of people in the United States slaves. They're mental slaves to something, listening to the evening news. You know, the biggest issue on the evening news is the jobless rate or Obamacare, how much it's going to cost you, and the end result is none of this is going to produce a better standard of life. You know, the people are driving up and down the road, burning up a $60,000 SUV and putting $20,000 of gas to it a year so they can drive to a job so they can pay interest on an overpriced house. You know, this is not this is the American nightmare. And
yeah, it is. It's not the American dream anymore. That's right.
Those are the people that are employed, you know, for the rest of the people. But I said on the break that we went from a country of 287 million people 10 years ago to a country of 350 million people now. We are on the cusp of growing into a country with 1 billion people. You know,
well, you hear Obama, now he thinks he's won this war. He's now pushing, he says, Dems push to take up amnesty, say Bonner will cave. And you see Obama, he's like, this guy is like, it's like, yeah, I won. Now I'm going to shove in 50 million more people or 100 million more, and of course the country will collapse. And he's talking also, they put in a resolution to Harry Reid in the Senate, in an executive order by Obama, that if there's, quote, climate change or if there's economic chaos in Muslim countries, they get a first on the list to come into America. Right now it's just European countries. What they want to do is they want to flood the country with people who will not become Americans, will retain their Muslim or their foreign culture, and they will destroy and balkanize America into little tiny fragments.
Yeah, the other thing about, I wanted to mention, I mentioned this on John Moore's show the other morning, is that the chip in the now in debit and credit cards in foreign countries is pretty much universal. The United States is the only country that has not been chipped with an RFID chip in their debit and credit cards. And so the card readers, and this is something that just has happened within the last couple of weeks, is American credit cards and debit cards no longer work in many foreign countries, and they're starting to get in. Walmart has been spearheading this, and they're one of the, being an international corporation. And the debit cards and credit cards of other countries don't work in the United States. So you see where this is going.
Yeah, and of course, let me give a bit of the document that I received. It's over 700 pages from the Lockheed Martin technician about the Virtual World Project. They want to have this so that they can track you down to 1 cubic meter. It doesn't have to be under your skin. It could be in a credit card or an iPhone. But they want to track you so that at any one time, they can know where you are. All your money is electronic debits in their supercomputer system. Everything has to have biometric validation of even logging onto the internet or certain websites. This is where it's all going, and they've already done it in the third world. Now they want to do it to Americans so that you'll have a tracker chip in your card, and unless it's in a Faraday cage or a shielded envelope in your wallet, you're going to be tracked and traced down to 1 cubic meter everywhere you go. With smart dust on the roadways and the doorways, to cell phone towers, to all kinds of Wi-Fi networks tracking you to a cubic meter everywhere you are.
Yeah, exactly. And everything you do, everything you buy. The whole issue is that ultimate control. These are psycho people running this entire thing. And what I always criticize are the scientists who produced this technology and then let it go and be operated, lost control of it because they never had control of the technology they were developing, and then let it go up the ladder to the New World Order to run and operate, and then control the public. So at the root of all of this are the scientists who located the world's water resources and turned that over to the New World Order so they can control it in the United Nations. The bio generation of food that was done by corporations, Monsanto's, the Cargills, etc., to control food on a worldwide scale from a laboratory. The insanity that's going on right now is beyond control. And then you look at science, real science, the tier 2 science, the garbage science that's being dumped on the public. I always say that this is the key. In my book, The Diamond Principle, I talk about this, that the key to all of this is the public being very stupid about science. You cannot have an educated public and have the New World Order pull off what they're doing. You have to keep them rock stupid, and thus all of the tier 2 science from NASA.
Yeah, I had a contact by numerous emails from telling me about a Dr. Bill Weld, who's supposedly in renal failure, who's a lawyer and an orthopedic surgeon that had something about nanotechnology that's infected everybody through the water supply. And then they started telling me what this thing could do. I said, this is total hogwash. This is not science. This is scamtastic. And it's the same thing as I'm talking about, whether it's Planet X or the danger of comets or the fact that there's free energy like Tesla talked about and you've talked about in your books. There's limitless energy out there. We have fusion technology. The actual reaction that occurs in the sun generates helium-3, and it crystallizes on the moon, which is 500,000 times higher concentration than the Earth, because of Van Allen radiation belts, 3 belts, blocks those particles of helium-3 from getting to the Earth, the planet, but they land on the moon. The fact is, we have all kinds of tier 1 science that could solve virtually every environmental and energy issue, but it's being purposely suppressed. They've bifurcated society because their plan is to kill most of us and get the life extension technology and the other technologies in the future that doesn't include most of us.
Yeah, the critical time is right now. That's the thing that I see as important, because without pulling the plug on society, on economy, on the things that are required, they're losing their grip. They're losing their grip, and it's coming up very quickly. And the charter is going to end up shortly. They want an airborne plague, and they want martial law, but they want to frighten us into accepting it so that we won't resist. They want to force, quote, chipping so they have a friend or foe chip, just like they did in Haiti when that earthquake struck. This is what's coming. And if people think this is just a theory, they're going to be in a state of abject, complete cataplectic shock when these things are all rolled out. We don't have exact dates, but we can read as they say, the tea leaves, and we can smell the breath of the dragon. Your comments, John and Ann.
Well, Dr. Bill, as always, I'm in agreement with you, and this is Liberty Man signing off.
Thanks, John, Ann, and Professor James McCanney has always said, ask better questions and then take action. We'll be back again next week with another amazing lineup. Check your own research out, pray on it, and then do something.